Some Hollywood legends didn't lose everything because of scandalous controversies, blacklists, or sheer bad luck. They lost it all simply because they were too foolish to see what was right in front of them. One actor turned down 3 of the greatest scripts in history, for reasons so shallow they sound like a joke today. Another spent his entire adult life behaving like a child star, until a petty argument cost him his life at 31. A 5-time Olympic champion became a global icon, without ever taking a single acting lesson, only to spend his final years wandering a nursing home, repeatedly doing his jungle yell for strangers. These aren't stories about villains. These are stories about men and women who had everything, yet quietly threw it away out of sheer stupidity, stubbornness, and blinding ego that could have been avoided. 1. George Raft, the fool who accidentally molded the legend of Humphrey Bogart. Picture this. You are one of the most powerful names at Warner Brothers, with gangster roles practically tailor-made for your face. Then, 3 scripts land on your desk, 3 works that would go down in history as some of the most important films ever made, and you say no to all 3. That is exactly what George Raft did in the early 1940s. His reasons didn't stem from profound artistic disagreements. They were embarrassingly petty and impulsive. He turned down the masterpiece High Sierra, simply because he didn't like that his character had to die at the end. He walked away from Babowal, Okual, The Maltese Falcon, because he refused to work with an unproven rookie director named John Huston. Behind the scenes, insiders knew Raft rarely read scripts himself. He would have his assistants summarize the plot, and then make career-defining decisions based on a hasty 2-minute recap. Warner Brothers didn't bother trying to fix him. They didn't sit him down to advise or beg him. They simply suspended Raft's pay and handed those rejected roles straight to a struggling contract actor trying to find his footing named Humphrey Bogart. The rest, as we know, is cinematic history. Raft's real problem was that he confused his tough guy image, bolstered by real-life friendships with mobsters like Bugsy Siegel, with actual acting talent. He treated Hollywood as an extension of the underworld rather than a profession that demanded cultivation. When post-war audiences started craving anti-heroes with depth and moral complexity, exactly the type of character Bogart was perfecting, Raft had nothing to offer. No acting range, no reinvention, no backup plan. By the 1950s, the phone stopped ringing entirely. He ended his career working as a greeter at a London casino, clinging to the memories of an empire he had personally handed over to someone else through a series of terrible decisions. 2. Karl Alfalfa Switzer, the child who permanently refused to grow up. Every child in America in the 1950s knew the boy with the freckled smile, the signature parted hair, and a singing voice intentionally made hilariously awful. Karl Alfalfa Switzer was one of the most recognizable faces nationwide thanks to the Our Gang shorts. But Hollywood has an incredibly cruel habit with child stars. It hypes them up, profits off their youth, and then discards them the moment they are no longer cute, never teaching them how to survive in the adult world. Switzer's true downfall wasn't merely outgrowing his role, but rather that he genuinely, truly never understood that the rules of the game had changed. As a child at Hal Roach Studios, he was treated like royalty, free to pull pranks and disrupt sets because he was too valuable to be disciplined. But when he grew into a lanky, awkward young man, he still defaulted to demanding that red carpet treatment. Switzer would show up on adult film sets demanding star privileges he hadn't deserved in years. He acted arrogant instead of humble, smug instead of eager to learn. The industry that once indulged his ego now couldn't care less about the psychological shock of a washed-up has-been. They only saw a useless actor. Pushed to the fringes, Switzer worked various odd jobs, including as a hunting guide, while continuously making increasingly reckless decisions as if consequences only applied to ordinary people. That mindset caught up with him in early 1959. A petty argument over a lost hunting dog and a meager $50 reward escalated into a violent confrontation. Switzer, with his lifelong habit of never backing down, lunged into attack and was shot dead at 31. Not because of some glamorous Hollywood scandal, but due to a lifelong failure to understand the true weight of his own actions. 3. Johnny Weissmuller, the speechless statue of flesh. Johnny Weissmuller became one of the highest-paid actors on the planet for a very specific reason. The studio realized he was completely, absolutely incapable of delivering dialogue. As a 5-time Olympic swimming champion, he possessed a flawless physique to play Tarzan in the 1930s. But the moment MGM placed him in front of the camera, they hit a concrete wall. The man simply could not act. He sweated bullets trying to memorize the most basic lines, and his delivery was as stiff as a board. Instead of wasting money and time training him, the studio did something unprecedented. They built the entire character around his limitations. They stripped away all complex dialogue, replacing it with grunts, broken English, and created the iconic jungle yell entirely through special effects in the recording studio. They didn't need a performing artist. They needed a profitable photogenic statue, and that was exactly what they got. What's remarkable is that Weissmuller was perfectly fine with this arrangement. He never seemed to realize how thoroughly he was being manipulated. For nearly 20 years, he happily swung from vine to vine, never asking for more challenging roles, never questioning contract terms, and never truly trying to learn the craft that fed him. He just kept playing the king of the jungle until he was too old and saggy to wear a loincloth, and then the calls from the studio gradually thinned out and disappeared. Once he stepped out of MGM's protective bubble, his total lack of real-world survival skills became painfully obvious. He threw his money into a series of disastrous investments, pitifully naive, and went through 5 costly marriages. Having spent his prime as a product managed by executives when they wrung him dry, he had nothing left. In his final years, he lived in a care facility with a confused mind, occasionally letting out the Tarzan yell to unfamiliar nursing staff. 4. John Agar, the man who threw away the golden ticket. John Agar landed the most exclusive golden ticket in Hollywood without having to attend a single competitive audition, without going to acting school, and without working his way up as an extra. He simply had a nice jawline, and more importantly, he married the national treasure, Shirley Temple. To studio executives in the late 1940s, Agar wasn't an unearthed talent. He was a built-in PR machine. Powerful producer David O. Selznick signed him immediately, and legendary director John Ford placed him right next to giants like John Wayne and Henry Fonda in the prestigious Western Fort Apache. Suddenly surrounded by the biggest names in the industry, Agar completely misunderstood his position. He mistook an orchestrated PR opportunity for his own irreplaceable talent. Instead of realizing how fragile his standing was and working frantically to match the caliber of his co-stars, he chose to coast. He arrived on set unprepared, fumbling basic lines, treating a cutthroat and ruthless industry like a casual weekend country club. His off-screen life mirrored that same obliviousness. A string of DUI arrests and embarrassing headlines, all fueled by the delusion that his looks and his marriage to Temple made him untouchable. But the studio system never protects useless dead weight once the profit vanishes. When Shirley Temple filed for divorce in 1949, Agar's invisible shield disappeared overnight. Without his wife's power to hide behind, executives finally faced the truth. He still couldn't act and had absolutely no discipline. They had milked that marriage for every ounce of free press, and the moment it ended, their patience dried up. Agar spent the ensuing decades drifting into cheap C-grade monster movies, a pathetic downward spiral from sharing the screen with John Wayne. 5. Wallace Beery, the highest-paid superstar who couldn't understand his script. In the early 1930s, the highest-paid actor at the most powerful studio on the planet wasn't some polished, debonair leading man. It was Wallace Beery, a hulking, boorish character actor who genuinely struggled to comprehend his own lines. Beery won an Oscar and dominated the box office by playing exactly one type of character over and over, a slow-witted brute hiding a heart of gold. Audiences at the time adored him. They thought they were watching a brilliant, nuanced performance by a talented actor embodying a fool. However, the directors who actually had to work directly with him on set knew a completely different truth. Beery wasn't acting. The confusion, the glazed look, and the sluggish reactions on set were simply the true essence of who he was, masked as a performance. It took him an agonizingly long time to grasp the simplest directions, and filming with him was constantly a test of patience. But because he was a cash cow, The studio covered up his limited intellect with the backing of their best editing teams. Beery is perhaps the rare lucky case on this list. A simpleton paid millions of dollars just to be himself in front of the camera until audiences finally grew tired of the shtick. 6. Bela Lugosi, the vampire who rejected immortality out of vanity. Bela Lugosi had just achieved one of the most resounding triumphs in Hollywood history. His performance as Count Dracula in 1931 turned him into a pop culture phenomenon overnight, reportedly saving Universal Studios from the brink of bankruptcy. Naturally, the studio wanted to strike while the iron was hot. They prepared to adapt another Gothic classic, Frankenstein, and everyone assumed Lugosi would take the lead. There was just one minor issue. The producers didn't want him playing the Mad Doctor. They wanted him to play the monster. Lugosi agreed to a screen test, and it was here that his massive ego swallowed his reason whole. A fierce argument erupted with the makeup team over the creature's design. When Lugosi realized this role would completely bury his handsome face under heavy prosthetics and strip him of almost all dialogue, he flat out refused. He arrogantly dismissed the role, calling it something only fit for a half-wit extra. He didn't want to be unrecognizable. He didn't want to be silent. He wanted to be a leading man, not a lumbering, oversized prop. That decision handed the role, and the role of a lifetime, to a little-known actor named Boris Karloff. Karloff's haunting, sympathetic performance skyrocketed him to global superstardom and made him the new iconic face of horror cinema. Meanwhile, Lugosi bitterly stood on the sidelines, watching the very career-defining role he had rejected become the most famous monster in cinematic history. It was a mistake he never recovered from. As Karloff's star continued to rise, Lugosi slid to the bottom of casting lists, spending the rest of his life chasing the spotlight he had once turned away. 7. Buster Keaton, the genius who surrendered his key to independence. By the late 1920s, Buster Keaton wasn't just a movie star. He was one of the most successful independent filmmakers alive. He wrote, directed, produced, and starred in his own films, controlling every minute creative decision down to each dangerous stunt. He owned a magnificent Beverly Hills mansion right next door to Rudolph Valentino, earned the modern equivalent of $60,000 a week, and had single-handedly built an absolute artistic freedom that most artists wouldn't even dare to dream of. Then, in 1928, he threw it all away entirely voluntarily. Keaton signed a contract handing his entire career over to the MGM machine, blindly chasing the promise of financial security and the backing of a massive studio. Charlie Chaplin and Harold Lloyd, two close friends and fellow comedy titans, personally begged him not to do it. They warned that he would lose his independence, the very core of who he was and his art. Keaton ignored it all. He believed a friend's empty promise that nothing would change. But everything changed. MGM threw teams of writers at him, forced him through script approval committees, and buried his improvisational genius under corporate bureaucracy. When Keaton tried to push back and refused to make films he considered garbage, the studio simply fired him for being difficult. The loss of control plunged him into a tragic spiral of alcoholism. The man who had personally executed the most expensive and grandiose stunts in cinema history was now forced to churn out movies he despised. He later called it the worst mistake of my life, a rare case of a legend destroying his own empire, not because of a scandal, but by willingly handing the key to his freedom over to someone else. 8. Mickey Rooney, the highest-earning box office king who died penniless. At his peak in the 1930s, Mickey Rooney wasn't just a star. He was the #1 box office magnate in the entire world, out-earning every other actor in Hollywood thanks to his beloved role as MGM's Andy Hardy. Over an astonishingly long career, spanning 9 decades with over 300 films, Rooney generated what should have been one of the greatest fortunes in entertainment history, but he blew through almost all of it down to the last penny. Rooney married 8 times, and the divorce settlements alone drained him of millions. The payout to his 4th wife in 1958 would be worth over $4 million today. He was a severe gambling addict who could never tear his eyes away from the racetrack or the card tables, frantically chasing losses with borrowed money year after year. Old studio contracts did not include residual royalties, so, unlike modern actors, Rooney didn't earn a dime when his movies were re-aired on TV. Every dollar he had came from active, continuous labor, and the moment the work slowed down, the income vanished. In 1962, he filed for bankruptcy for the first time with only $500 in cash against $500,000 in debt. He clawed his way back, only to lose it all again and file for bankruptcy a second time in 1996. In his final years, he even had to drag his own stepson to court, accusing him of mismanaging and siphoning the little money he had left. When Mickey Rooney died in 2014 at the age of 93, the entire estate of the money-making machine that once dominated Hollywood was valued at a mere $18,000. It is the harshest reminder that talent is never enough to save someone from their own extravagance. 9. Errol Flynn, the hero who burned himself down with alcohol and lust. You are the biggest action star on the planet, the man whose name became an idiom for effortless success, in like Flynn. And then within a decade, your own reckless lifestyle becomes the thing that destroys you? That is exactly what happened to Errol Flynn, and it wasn't due to studio politics or bad scripts, but a mountain of his own reckless choices piling up until there was nothing left to protect him. In the early 1940s, Flynn had it all, leading roles in Captain Blood and The Adventures of Robin Hood, a reputation as Hollywood's most charming rogue, and a public image that believed his wild lifestyle was just harmless fun. Then in late 1942, two teenage girls accused him of statutory rape, one incident allegedly occurring on his own private yacht. The trial became a national sensation, and although a jury acquitted him in 1943, the damage to his image was permanent. Insiders later said the trial marked the beginning of his freefall. Instead of correcting his behavior, Flynn doubled down on the exact vices that had brought him to court. His alcoholism became devastating. In his final years, he was drinking up to 2 liters of vodka a day. His collapsing health made him look decades older than his actual age. His final film was a trashy low-budget project where he co-starred with his last girlfriend, a relationship that began when she was just 15. Flynn died at 50, his body wrecked and his career forgotten, having single-handedly destroyed the brilliant legend he had worked so hard to build. 10. Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle, the party that destroyed an empire overnight. Imagine you are the highest-paid comedian in Hollywood, having just signed a contract worth the modern equivalent of tens of millions of dollars. And within a single week, one party turns you into the most hated man in America forever. That is what befell Roscoe Fatty Arbuckle in September 1921. While the truth about that night remains shrouded in mystery, it is certain that Arbuckle's own impulsive decisions sparked the disaster. He had just signed a 3-year, $3 million contract with Paramount and decided to celebrate with a massive booze-fueled party at a San Francisco hotel, right in the middle of national prohibition. Simply hosting such an event was already a terrifying legal risk. During the party, actress Virginia Rapp fell severely ill and died a few days later. Arbuckle was charged with manslaughter. The sensationalist press painted him as a sadistic monster before he even set foot in a courtroom. He endured 3 grueling trials. By the 3rd trial in 1922, the jury not only acquitted him in just 5 minutes, but also wrote a formal letter of apology for the injustice he had suffered. But by then, it was too late. Hollywood studios, desperate to protect the industry's image, permanently banned him from the screen. A legally innocent man lost everything he had built simply because of a reckless decision to throw a wild party. Arbuckle spiraled into addiction and died of heart failure at the age of 46. 11. Mae Murray, the queen who abdicated her throne for a fake aristocrat. Known as the girl with the bee-stung lips, Mae Murray was one of MGM's biggest money-making superstars during the silent film era. But her ego became toxically inflated when she married David Mondovani, a man who styled himself as a Prince of Georgia. This fake prince constantly whispered in Murray's ear that she was an entity greater than the studio itself, inciting her to disrespect the notoriously powerful mogul Louis B. Mayer. Believing her gold-digging husband's sweet talk, Murray made a suicidal career move. She impulsively tore up her massive contract with MGM. arrogantly convinced that once she walked out, every other studio would roll out the red carpet for her. But she drastically underestimated Mayer's dark power. Instead of begging, the studios slammed their doors shut. Mayer ordered a nationwide blacklist against her, ensuring no one would dare hire her. The moment Murray's career collapsed and the money evaporated, the prince took whatever assets were left and vanished. From the peak of MGM stardom, Mae Murray lost everything and spent her final years in abject poverty, begging for uncredited extra roles. 12. Veronica Lake, the blonde bombshell who burned every bridge. With her signature peekaboo bang covering half her face, Veronica Lake was a global beauty icon of the 1940s. However, her stunning looks and brilliant film noir acting skills came with a personality so toxic that no one could stand her. On set, she was arrogant, bitter, and constantly picked fights. Veteran actors like Frederick March and Eddie Bracken publicly declared they would rather quit acting than co-star with her ever again. Not only did she make enemies of her colleagues, her personal life was also a disaster. She even sued her own biological mother over a financial dispute. When directors and producers could no longer tolerate her erratic temperament, they simply stopped calling. In Hollywood, beauty can buy your ticket in, but your attitude determines how long you stay. Ostracized from the industry, Lake spiraled into severe alcoholism. A few years later, the public and the press were shocked to discover that the once massive star was working as a cocktail waitress in a rundown, cheap bar in New York. 13. John Gilbert, the suicidal punch to a mogul's face. John Gilbert was MGM's greatest male star, a silent film idol, on par with Rudolph Valentino. He had money, looks, and a rabid fan base. But he made a fatal mistake born of uncontrolled anger. During an event, often rumored to be his aborted wedding to Greta Garbo, the ruthlessly powerful mogul Louis B. Mayer approached and made a deeply crude remark about the bride. Enraged, Gilbert threw a punch straight to Mayer's face, knocking the most powerful man in Hollywood to the floor. Mayer slowly got up and coldly swore to ruin him. And he did exactly that. When the talkie era began, instead of supporting his #1 star, Mayer actively sabotaged Gilbert. He assigned Gilbert the cheesiest, most ridiculous scripts and supposedly instructed sound technicians to alter the frequencies so that Gilbert's voice sounded as squeaky and comical as possible. Audiences, accustomed to his masculine hero image, burst into laughter when they heard him speak. Gilbert's career collapsed in total humiliation. Pride and defending a lover are fine, but punching the man holding the keys to your career is undoubtedly a disastrous decision. 14. Louise Rayner, the arrogant Oscar winner who quit the game. Louise Rayner was an incredibly talented actress, the first person in history to win 2 consecutive Academy Awards for Best Actress, in 1936 and 1937. But that very radiant victory inflated her ego to uncontrollable proportions. Considering herself untouchable and above the rules, Rayner constantly made unreasonable demands regarding scripts, directors, and salary with MGM. When mogul Louis B. Mayer refused to meet her demands, she arrogantly announced she was quitting and walked away from Hollywood. Rayner was convinced that with 2 golden statuettes, the entire industry would panic and soon come crawling to her feet bearing blockbuster scripts. But she forgot an ironclad rule. Hollywood never considers anyone irreplaceable. No one panicked. No director called to beg. They immediately found younger, more obedient actresses to replace her. Rayner was forgotten with dizzying speed. Her ego had completely severed a career that could have been the greatest of the century. 15. Louise Brooks, the stubborn legend who evaporated over a few bucks. Louise Brooks was an iconic bombshell of the 1920s, globally famous for her edgy bob and rebellious flapper style. She went to Europe to make films and achieved massive success. When the sound era exploded, Paramount demanded Brooks return to Hollywood to dub her own voice for the film The Canary Murder Case, which she had already shot. Feeling the offered salary was inadequate, Brooks stubbornly and flatly refused. Paramount threatened that if she didn't return, they would hire someone else to dub her and put her on an industry-wide blacklist. Brooks, with her arrogant and stubborn nature, sarcastically replied, "Go ahead." And they actually did. The studio blacklisted her across the media and all professional networks. From being an international goddess sought after by millions, Louise Brooks's reckless attitude cost her every opportunity. No one dared hire her anymore. Later in life, she fell into such poverty that she had to work as a sales clerk at Macy's and even as a dancer just to survive. From the blinding ego of George Raft to the arrogance of Louise Brooks, or the fatal party of Arbuckle, the rule of this machine has never changed. Hollywood didn't actively destroy these people. They threw it all away themselves, simply out of a delusion that they were greater than an entire industry.